Story 1. The Halloween Sadist, The Death of Timothy O'Brien, Pasadena, Texas, 1974. October 31, 1974. A perfect, crisp Texas Halloween. For 8-year-old Timothy O'Brien, the night was a kaleidoscope of excitement. He was dressed, perhaps, as a cowboy or a spaceman, one of the endless possibilities of childhood. His little sister, Elizabeth, just 5, was clutching her candy bag tight. Their father, Ronald Clark O'Brien, was playing the role of the enthusiastic dad, walking with them and their friends, the Bates family. But O'Brien wasn't basking in the joy, he was calculating. He was a man drowning in $100,000 in crippling debt, facing repossession and the collapse of his life. His mind was focused entirely on the $40,000 in life insurance policies he had secretly taken out on his 2 children, policies that were, by a cruel twist of fate, due to expire in less than a week. The early hours of trick-or-treating were cheerful, a tapestry of knocking doors and delighted shrieks. But then O'Brien steered the group down a darker, less populated street. The plan was already in motion. They approached one house, a dark, silent silhouette against the harvest moon. The porch light was off, a clear sign of non-participation. "Let's move on," said Jim Bates, the family friend. But O'Brien hesitated, a strange intensity in his eyes. He insisted they wait, claiming he'd seen someone inside. The lie was forming, a malignant seed planted in the soil of Halloween tradition. Ronald O'Brien announced he'd wait while the others checked a few more houses down the street. It was an unnecessary separation that served his sinister purpose. Moments later, the group saw him re-emerge from the shadows near the house, walking briskly toward them. His hands held not cheap foil-wrapped candy, but 5 unusually large 45-centimeter-long pixie sticks, a prized treat. He was radiating a strange, false energy, the adrenaline of a man committed to an atrocity. "I found a house that was giving out special candy," he claimed, breathless. "A man didn't open the door all the way, just reached out and handed me these. Said he only had 5. Jim Bates was instantly suspicious. The story was flimsy, no one gives out treats that way on Halloween. But O'Brien was already distributing the poison straws. 1 for Timothy, 1 for Elizabeth, 2 for Bates's sons, and a 5th to an entirely unrelated neighborhood boy. He was spreading the deadly net, creating a necessary distraction. If multiple children were poisoned, the police would look for a maniacal stranger, not a desperate father. The cyanide, a white powder indistinguishable from the sugary mix, was packed tight inside. Jim Bates, uncomfortable with O'Brien's bizarre tale, made his sons promise not to open the candy until he had a chance to inspect it. This small act of parental caution was the salvation of 3 boys. The 5th boy's father, upon hearing the strange account, immediately threw the unusual candy into a storm drain. O'Brien's web was already failing, but he didn't know it yet. His focus was on his primary target. The group returned to the O'Brien house, the floor soon covered in mounds of hard candy, chocolate bars, and gum. Timothy, as any child would, gravitated toward the largest, most exciting treat, the pixie sticks. He struggled with the tightly packed paper straw. It was the crucial moment. O'Brien watched and then, with feigned kindness, offered to help. He deliberately tore the top of the stick, ensuring the powder was accessible. The image of a father holding his son's candy, assisting him in consuming a lethal dose of cyanide, is the central, monstrous picture of this crime. Timothy took a large gulp of the white powder. His immediate reaction was critical. He spat some of it out, complaining with a child's honesty, "It tastes bitter." O'Brien, however, urged him to drink some Kool-Aid to wash the taste away. Within minutes, Timothy was violently ill. He began vomiting in the hallway. The cyanide was fast, horrific, and overwhelming. His mother, Dana, heard the commotion and rushed to his side, seeing him instantly go from ill to critically convulsing. She screamed for help. Ronald O'Brien was there, playing the part of the horrified father, yet every second was confirmation of his success. Timothy went into spasms, choking and turning blue. The chemical compound, a swift and brutal cellular poison, was paralyzing his respiratory system. The trauma was immediate, leaving no time for an antidote. Dana would later recount the sheer helplessness of watching her son die in her arms. The arrival of the paramedics and police shattered the remaining veneer of a normal Halloween. Timothy was pronounced dead at the hospital. Cause of death: cyanide poisoning. The tragedy sent a wave of panic throughout Pasadena and beyond. The media immediately seized on the sensational Halloween Sadist story, a shadowy killer poisoning innocent children. But for the veteran investigators, the facts didn't fit the narrative of a random madman. They interviewed Jim Bates, who recounted the house, the mystery man, and the strange, rushed distribution of the 5 sticks. Bates's suspicion, combined with O'Brien's emotional detachment during questioning, created the first major crack. Detectives soon found that the house O'Brien pointed to was owned by a retired air traffic controller who had been at work all night. They also discovered that the 5th poison stick, the one given to the neighbor, had been thrown out, meaning O'Brien was the source, not a victim of a killer. The net tightened as the financial investigation revealed the massive debts and the looming expiration date of the children's insurance policies. Ronald Clark O'Brien was arrested and charged with capital murder. His trial revealed him to be a man driven by pure, cold-hearted greed, willing to sacrifice his own children and endanger others to escape his financial distress. The jury took only 46 minutes to convict him. The outrage was immense. The crime was not just murder, but the destruction of a deeply held public trust in a holiday built on neighborly kindness. On March 31, 1984, Ronald O'Brien was executed by lethal injection. Outside the prison walls, a large crowd gathered, many chanting, "Trick or treat," as a grim final condemnation of his actions. The execution was controversial, but the psychological impact of his crime was permanent. To this day, the case remains the primary reason for widespread parental suspicion regarding trick-or-treating. Timothy O'Brien's death forever etched a permanent scar onto Halloween, a tragic reminder that sometimes, the most terrifying monsters are the ones without a mask. Story 2. The Lifelike Decoration, the Maryland Discovery, Rock Creek, Maryland, 2009. The neighborhood in Rock Creek, Maryland, eagerly awaited the changing leaves not just for the autumn colors, but for the annual spectacle provided by one of its more private residents. This particular woman, known to be somewhat of a recluse, had a passionate, all-consuming love for Halloween. She didn't just decorate, she staged elaborate, theatrical, and sometimes profoundly unsettling horror scenes in her yard. In October 2009, she had outdone herself. The display was a grand guignol of gore and suspense. The centerpiece was a figure lying at the front entrance, slumped face-first against the concrete doorstep, as if collapsing while trying to open the door. The staging was immaculate. A dark stain, which people assumed was fake blood, spread out around the head, and the figure was dressed in everyday clothes, giving it a chilling verisimilitude. Neighbors and drivers would slow down, impressed by the hyper-realism of the dead body prop. They would nod in appreciation. She was, after all, the neighborhood's undisputed Halloween champion. The routine of the neighborhood, admiring the decoration and moving on, was interrupted by a matter of local government. A tax assessor was dispatched to the property for a standard, external appraisal. It was a mundane task that required her to examine and photograph the front of the house. As she approached, the detail of the homeowner's display was her first thought. She was struck by how genuinely disturbing the figure was. But as she got within a few feet, the professional distance evaporated, replaced by a growing sense of discomfort. The air was noticeably wrong. A thick, sickening, putrid odor hung heavily, something distinct from leaf mold or dumpster refuse. It was a smell the assessor, an experienced observer, registered as deeply unsettling. Her eyes then went to the figure itself, specifically to the insects. There was an abnormal cloud of flies and other buzzing insects concentrated around the prop's head and torso. Too real, she thought, assuming the woman must have used some kind of realistic animal guts or strong-smelling synthetic compounds for effect. The assessor, trying to maintain her composure, pulled out her camera to photograph the doorway. But the stench was overpowering, forcing her to cough and cover her mouth. Her professionalism was battling her innate human instinct. She tried to rationalize. It's just an extremely realistic, high-effort Halloween prop. The homeowner is eccentric. But the sheer number of insects and the intensity of the smell defied explanation. A prop should not draw this many flies. A simple, logical impulse drove her next action. She had to confirm, for her own peace of mind, that this was not something she needed to report. She crept closer to the figure, her mind still clinging to the explanation of a very clever, disturbing dummy. She was going to poke it just lightly to confirm the texture of plastic or latex. It was an act of curiosity driven by genuine revulsion. She reached out a hesitant, gloved finger. She was braced for the feel of hard resin, painted foam, or cheap fabric. The shock of what she actually felt was instant and visceral. Instead of the rigidity of a mannequin, the figure was soft, cool, and yielding. It gave under the slightest pressure, with a disturbing weight and texture that was undeniably organic. There was no plastic, no latex. The figure at the threshold was not a prop. The truth slammed into the assessor with paralyzing force. She had been standing over a deceased human being, the homeowner herself. The scene, which the community had been admiring for potentially over a day, was not a carefully curated display of fictional death, but a terrible, tragic reality. Her scream was silent, replaced by a frantic scramble back toward her car as she simultaneously fumbled for her phone to call the emergency services. The arrival of the police and first responders was jarring. Uniformed officers, trained to be stoic, reacted with a palpable wave of surprise upon seeing the scene. The body was identified as the 42-year-old female homeowner. The official conclusion was that she had suffered a sudden medical emergency, likely a cardiac event, and had collapsed and died right there on her front step. Her own Halloween spectacle had effectively camouflaged her death. The neighborhood, which was used to the sights of horror, now fell into a stunned, horrified silence. The discovery became a local legend overnight, a genuine Halloween tragedy far more unsettling than any decoration. Neighbors came forward, pale-faced, admitting they had seen the figure and complimented the homeowner's dedication, or pointed it out to visitors as the creepiest display on the block. The profound irony and betrayal of perception hung heavy in the air. The lifelike decoration was removed, the scene documented, and the story went silent in the news, but its impact remained. The woman had inadvertently created the most realistic horror scene of the season, becoming a warning about the complacency that can set in when we expect spectacle. It was a brutal illustration of how quickly we can dismiss reality when it's presented in the guise of fantasy. The house, once a beacon of Halloween fun, became a source of unease, forever associated with the quiet horror of that discovery. For those who lived on that street, the sound of a rustling leaf or the sudden appearance of a lifelike prop would never feel quite the same. The Maryland discovery serves as a deeply unsettling, true Halloween anecdote. A reminder that sometimes the line between costume and corpse is frighteningly thin, and on the darkest night of the year, we should remember to look closer. Story 3. The Chainsaw Massacre, the Utah Prankster, Utah. Various locations. It was a classic, mid to late 1990s Halloween night, the air filled with the distant sounds of teens playing pranks and the shouts of successful trick-or-treaters. Our narrators are a group of high schoolers, perhaps 15 or 16, who, with a mix of defiance and nostalgia, decided they weren't too old for one last great candy haul. They were deep in a residential neighborhood in Utah, far from the central, well-lit areas, when they opted for the unholy shortcut. This path was a strip of overgrown, neglected woods that connected two major streets. It was dark, deeply shadowed by mature trees, and offered no streetlights. It was the place teenagers dared each other to go after midnight. Now, just after full dark, they took it with loud, nervous laughter, the rustle of their costumes blending with the crackle of dry leaves underfoot. The path was barely 40 yards long, but in the dark, it felt like a mile, a tunnel of dense blackness. They were acutely aware of the stories, the urban legends of people lurking in the trees, and that low-grade fear was the reason they took the path in the first place. As they neared the middle of the path, where the canopy was thickest and the darkness most profound, the nervous chatter died. They were suddenly aware of how isolated they were. The sound of distant car horns and the happy yells of children seemed miles away. It was a perfect vacuum of silence. And then it came. From the back end of the path, the direction they had just traveled, a metallic sound, a rapid pull on a cord, followed by a terrifying, mechanical roar. It was the unmistakable guttural sound of a gas-powered chainsaw ripping to life. It was so loud, so raw, that it seemed to vibrate the very air in the woods. The sound alone was a physical assault. The initial reaction was a bewildered, frozen shock, a few seconds of disbelief that this couldn't be real. It must be a house party, an elaborate stereo effect. The disbelief lasted only moments. Emerging from the blackness, framed by the faint moonlight that barely pierced the trees, was a figure. He was tall, dressed in dark clothing, and obscured by a heavy, featureless mask, the archetype of a slasher killer. And he was holding the roaring chainsaw out in front of him. The machine was terrifyingly real, its chain visible and spinning, its sound a wall of pure, deafening aggression. The figure didn't stop or pose. He instantly began to run, charging down the narrow path straight at the teenagers. This was no gentle scare, it was a full-speed, life-threatening pursuit. The kids didn't hesitate. They abandoned all pretense of cool and professionalism, dropping their candy bags and unleashing pure, adrenaline-fueled screams. They turned and sprinted back the way they came, their feet scrambling for purchase on the uneven ground. The sound of the roaring chainsaw and the figure's heavy, rhythmic footfalls were terrifyingly close behind them. They were running faster than they had ever run in their lives, fear overriding exhaustion and the physical hindrance of their own costumes. In a panic-fueled, split-second decision that could only happen in such a moment of pure terror, one of the teens, perhaps a girl dressed as a princess or a superhero, darted off the main path and flattened herself against the brick wall of the nearest house. The rest followed, piling into the small, dark alcove by the side of the house. They huddled together, breathless and silent, their faces pressed against the cold brick. They could hear the man's heavy breathing and the horrifying revving engine of the chainsaw just feet away, the sound of the machine echoing violently off the nearby walls. The fear was absolute, they were cornered and the weapon was real. The moments in the alcove felt like an eternity. Each rev of the engine was a hammer blow against their eardrums. Just as they braced themselves for the inevitable, for the brick to crash down or the chainsaw to tear into the siding, the sound abruptly cut out. The deafening roar was replaced by a sudden, total, unnerving silence. They stayed frozen, waiting for the sound of a voice, a laugh, or a clue that this was simply a prank. Nothing. After what felt like 5 minutes, the bravest of the group cautiously peered around the corner. The path was completely empty. The masked man, the chainsaw, the dropped candy bags, all gone. The only sound was their own ragged breathing. It was as if the figure was less a prankster and more a genuine specter, vanishing into the night. Eventually, after a frantic dash home, they rationalized the event. The man must have had an escape route, perhaps a fence he quickly vaulted, or a prearranged hiding spot in a backyard. He was a committed, dangerous prankster who was using the cloak of Halloween to enact an extreme scare. But the experience left a lasting scar. The incident became a local legend and a permanent point of reference for their own concept of fear. The chainsaw incident is a common, terrifying true Halloween event, not a ghost story or a crime, but an extreme example of the line crossed between fun and trauma. It reminds us that on Halloween night, the masks are not always worn by the people we expect, and the most frightening props can sometimes be real tools wielded by unpredictable hands. It's a true story about the fragility of safety and the power of a mask to unleash temporary, yet profound terror.